The sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway at 6 a.m., red and blue lights painting my cabin walls like a crime scene. I stumbled to the door in my pajamas, heart hammering as Deputy Martinez stepped out with a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you this early, but I have a court order here. You've got 48 hours to demolish the structure or face criminal charges." I stared at the demolition order, my hands shaking. 23 citations. Everything from unpermitted structure to visual pollution to violation of community character standards. My grandfather's hunting cabin, the one I'd spent 3 years lovingly restoring with my own hands, was apparently an affront to humanity, according to Meredith Blackwell, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. What Meredith didn't know was that my cousin Danny had just been elected county judge 2 months ago. And Danny remembered every single family barbecue where I'd talked about this cabin project, every weekend I'd spent sweating over reclaimed timber and hand-forged hardware. He also remembered growing up in this very cabin during summer visits to Grandpa Joe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. It started 6 months earlier when I bought the 40-acre property at the end of Mockingbird Lane. The realtor, Janet, had been crystal clear the HOA only covers the first quarter mile of developed lots. Your property is outside their jurisdiction entirely. She pointed to the plat map, finger tracing the boundary line that stopped well short of my land. You're in the county's unincorporated area. Different rules entirely. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The property had been in foreclosure for 3 years. Grandpa Joe's old hunting cabin sat in the center of 40 acres of mixed hardwood and pine, about half a mile down a gravel road that wound through the woods like a lazy river. The cabin itself was a disaster, roof caving in, porch sagging, windows boarded up with plywood. But the bones were good. Solid oak logs, a stone foundation that hadn't shifted an inch in 60 years, and a view of Mill Creek that would make you forget your troubles. I'd grown up visiting this place every summer until Grandpa passed when I was 15. Now, at 32, I finally had the money and skills to bring it back to life. The restoration became my obsession. Every weekend, every vacation day, I was out there with my tools and a cooler full of beer. I stripped the old chinking and replaced it with fresh mortar mixed the traditional way. Rebuilt the roof with cedar shakes. I split myself. Replaced every window with period-correct, double-hung sashes I found at salvage yards across 3 states. The front porch was my masterpiece. I hand-hewed the support posts from trees that had fallen on the property, using traditional joinery techniques I'd learned from YouTube and trial and error. No nails in the entire structure, just wooden pegs and mortise and tenon joints that would last another century. For 3 months, I worked in blissful solitude. Deer would graze in the clearing while I worked on the roof. Wild turkeys strutted through the yard like they owned the place. The only sounds were my hammer, the creek babbling 50 yards away, and the occasional distant hum of traffic from the main road. Then Meredith Blackwell discovered I existed. I was installing the last of the porch railings on a Saturday morning in April when I heard the unmistakable sound of an expensive SUV struggling up my gravel road. A white Escalade emerged from the trees, pristine paint job already collecting dust from the drive. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine, perfectly styled blonde hair, designer jeans that had never seen actual work, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that comes from too many years bossing around retail workers and PTA meetings. "Are you the property owner here?" I set down my drill and walked to the edge of the porch. "That's me, Jake Morrison. Can I help you?" She looked around the property like she was surveying a crime scene, her lips pursed in disapproval. I'm Meredith Blackwell, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA. We need to discuss this construction project of yours. Construction project? I gestured to the cabin behind me. I'm restoring my grandfather's old hunting cabin. Been working on it for months. That's exactly the problem. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. This structure is completely inappropriate for our community. It's affecting property values for everyone in Sunset Ridge. I felt the first stirring of anger in my chest. Ma'am, with all due respect, this property isn't part of your HOA. I'm outside your jurisdiction entirely. Her laugh was sharp and cold. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Morrison. Sunset Ridge has protective covenants that extend to any property visible from our community roads. And this shack is most definitely visible. She was lying, and we both knew it. You couldn't see my cabin from Mockingbird Lane unless you drove half a mile down my private gravel road. But something in her tone told me this woman was used to getting her way through sheer force of will and expensive lawyers. Need to check your property surveys again, I said, keeping my voice level. This land has never been part of any HOA. We'll see about that. She snapped one more photo, this one of me standing on the porch. You'll be hearing from our legal team within the week. I suggest you start making plans to demolish this eyesore before we're forced to take more serious action. She climbed back into her Escalade and reversed down the gravel road, leaving me standing there with sawdust in my hair and a growing sense that my peaceful restoration project had just become a war. The first letter arrived 3 days later. Certified mail, thick envelope, law firm letterhead that screamed expensive. Notice of covenant violation in bold letters across the top. According to the letter, my unpermitted structure violated 17 different community standards, from building height restrictions to aesthetic harmony requirements. The letter demanded I appear before the HOA board within 2 weeks to explain myself or face escalating enforcement actions. I spent that evening on the phone with Janet, my realtor. Jake, I'm looking at the plat maps right now, she said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Your property is definitely outside the HOA. This is harassment, pure and simple. So what do I do about it? Ignore them. They have no authority over you whatsoever. If they keep bothering you, we'll get you a lawyer. I wanted to believe it would be that simple. But something told me Meredith Blackwell wasn't the type to give up easily. The next weekend, I was replacing the porch floorboards when I heard vehicles coming up the road. Not one engine this time, several. I looked up to see a convoy of SUVs and pickup trucks emerging from the tree line. Meredith's white Escalade in the lead, followed by 5 other vehicles filled with grim-faced suburbanites in polo shirts and khaki shorts. They parked in a semicircle around my cabin like they were preparing for a siege. Meredith emerged from her vehicle carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that could have curdled milk. Behind her came her army of HOA board members and concerned neighbors, all armed with phones and cameras. Mr. Morrison, she announced, in a voice loud enough to be heard in the next county as president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, I'm serving you with an official cease and desist order. She marched up to my porch and thrust a document at me. This one was even thicker than the first letter, filled with legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. 72 hours to stop all construction activities and begin demolition of this structure, she continued, while her supporters took pictures of everything: the cabin, the porch, my truck, even my tool shed. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $500 until the structure is removed. I looked down at the document, then back at her face. Ma'am, I've already told you this property isn't part of your HOA. You have no authority here. That's where you're wrong. She smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Our community covenants specifically include provisions for structures that negatively impact the visual character of the neighborhood, regardless of property boundaries. Your little shack here can be seen from 3 different houses in Sunset Ridge. Only if you drive half a mile down my private road, I pointed out. Doesn't matter. Impact is impact. She gestured to her followers, who were now measuring distances and taking notes like crime scene investigators. We've consulted with our attorneys, and they assure us we have every right to enforce our community standards. One of the board members, a thin man with a mustache that belonged in a 1970s porn movie, stepped forward. Son, you seem like a reasonable person. Why don't you just build something more appropriate? Maybe a nice modern vacation home? Something that fits with the community aesthetic? I felt heat rising in my face. Because this is my grandfather's cabin. This is where I spent my summers as a kid. I'm not tearing down family history because it doesn't match your idea of community aesthetic. Family history doesn't override property values, Meredith snapped. Do you have any idea how much money the residents of Sunset Ridge have invested in their homes? Your little nostalgia project is affecting everyone's investment. Then maybe they shouldn't have bought houses half a mile away from a property that's been here for 60 years. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Meredith's supporters muttered among themselves, taking more pictures, making more notes. I felt like a specimen in a zoo, surrounded by predators looking for weakness. 72 hours, Mr. Morrison, Meredith repeated. After that, we'll be forced to take more serious action. They climbed back into their vehicles and drove away in their little convoy, leaving me standing on my porch with a legal document I couldn't understand and a growing certainty that this fight was just getting started. That night, I called my cousin Danny. We'd grown up together, spent summers at this very cabin, gotten into more trouble than 2 kids had any right to survive. He'd gone to law school while I learned carpentry, but we'd stayed close over the years. Danny, I need some advice, I said when he picked up. I've got an HOA trying to force me to tear down Grandpa Joe's cabin. Wait, what? The cabin on Mill Creek? The one you've been restoring? That's the one. Some woman named Meredith Blackwell is claiming I'm violating community covenants, even though my property isn't part of their HOA. There was a long pause. When Danny spoke again, his voice had changed. Gone was my laid-back cousin. This was Judge Daniel Morrison, and he sounded pissed. Jake, I want you to scan every document they've given you and email them to me tonight. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and definitely don't tear down that cabin. I'll handle this. Danny, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling. That cabin means as much to me as it does to you. These people have no idea what they've walked into. The next morning, I drove into town to scan and email the documents. When I got back to the cabin around noon, there were 2 county vehicles parked in my driveway. A building inspector's truck and a code enforcement sedan. Thank. Had Meredith escalated to the county level already? But when the building inspector approached me, he was smiling. Mr. Morrison? I'm Jim Hendricks, County Building Inspector. Got a call from Judge Morrison's office asking us to do a courtesy inspection of your restoration project. Relief flooded through me. Courtesy inspection? Standard procedure when there are questions about permits or code compliance. Mind if we take a look around? For the next hour, Jim and the code enforcement officer examined every inch of my cabin. They checked the foundation, tested the electrical work I'd done, inspected the plumbing, measured room sizes, and examined the roof structure. Son, I've got to say, Jim told me as he finished his notes, this is some of the finest restoration work I've seen in 20 years. Every inch of this place exceeds current building codes. The craftsmanship is museum quality. He handed me a document. Official County Inspection Certificate. This cabin is not only legal, it's a credit to the community. Anyone gives you trouble about permits or code compliance, you show them this. As the county vehicles drove away, I felt like I could breathe again. But I knew Meredith wasn't done with me. People like her don't give up when they face their first setback. They double down. I was right. The harassment started small. My mailbox got knocked over twice in 1 week. Someone scattered nails on my gravel road. My truck tires were slashed while I was working on the cabin roof. Then, things escalated. I came out one morning to find orange spray paint on the side of my cabin. YESORE in foot-high letters across the beautiful log walls I'd spent months restoring. The paint had soaked deep into the wood. It would take days to sand it off and restain the affected area. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the trail camera I found hidden in a tree 30 yards from my cabin. Someone was watching me, documenting my every move on my own property. I was examining the camera when my phone rang. Unknown number. Jake Morrison? The voice was crisp, professional, expensive. Speaking. This is Richard Steinberg, attorney for the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. I represent Ms. Blackwell and the HOA board in their dispute with you. There's no dispute, Mr. Steinberg. They have no authority over my property. I'm afraid that's incorrect, Mr. Morrison. My clients have filed a formal complaint with the county court alleging multiple violations of community covenants. You're required to appear in court next Friday at 9 a.m. to answer these charges. My stomach dropped. Community covenants that don't apply to my property. That will be for the court to decide. I should warn you, Mr. Morrison, my clients are prepared to seek maximum penalties. Daily fines, court costs, attorney fees. This could get very expensive for you very quickly. We'll see about that. Indeed, we will. See you in court, Mr. Morrison. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. These people had serious money and serious lawyers. I was just a carpenter who'd inherited some land and wanted to fix up his grandfather's cabin. That evening, I called Danny again. They're taking me to court, I told him. Some lawyer named Steinberg filed formal complaints. Richard Steinberg? Danny's voice was sharp. That arrogant piece of work. Jake, I need to recuse myself from this case. I can't preside over a lawsuit involving family. My heart sank. So I'm on my own? Hell no. I'm transferring the case to Judge Patricia Williams. Patty's been on the bench for 15 years, and she has zero patience for HOA overreach. More importantly, she grew up in a cabin just like Grandpa's. She'll see right through their bullshit. But what about their lawyers? I can't afford. Already handled. My friend Mike Chen owes me about a dozen favors. He's one of the best property law attorneys in the state, and he's agreed to take your case pro bono. Consider it a family discount. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this fight wasn't as hopeless as it seemed. The week leading up to the court hearing was a nightmare. More vandalism. More harassment. Someone filed a complaint with the health department claiming I was operating an illegal septic system. Another complaint with the Environmental Protection Agency claiming I was polluting Mill Creek. Both agencies showed up, conducted thorough investigations, and found nothing wrong. But the stress was eating me alive. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. I put on my only suit, the one I'd worn to Grandpa Joe's funeral 5 years earlier, and drove to the courthouse. The parking lot was already full of white Civics and luxury sedans. Meredith had brought her army. Inside the courtroom, I found Mike Chen waiting for me. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit that fit like it was custom-made. Jake Morrison? He stood up and shook my hand. Mike Chen. Danny's told me all about you and this case. Don't worry, we're going to destroy them. Across the courtroom, Richard Steinberg held court with Meredith and her board of directors. He was everything I'd imagined, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of confident smirk that comes from winning cases through intimidation rather than merit. Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom and everyone stood. She was a small woman, maybe 55, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute authority. This is the matter of Sunset Ridge HOA versus Morrison. Counsel, state your positions. Steinberg stood first. For the next 20 minutes, he painted me as a reckless property owner who was destroying community values and harming his clients' property investments. He showed photographs of my cabin, calling it a primitive structure, inconsistent with community standards, and a visual blight that damages the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. His presentation was slick, professional, and completely dishonest. He made it sound like my cabin was a condemned crack house instead of a carefully restored piece of local history. Then it was Mike's turn. "Your Honor," he began, and his voice was calm, measured, devastating. "Mr. Morrison's property has never been part of the Sunset Ridge HOA. It predates their development by 40 years. The plaintiffs have no standing to enforce any covenants on property outside their jurisdiction." He pulled out a stack of documents. County property records clearly show that Mr. Morrison's 40 acres were specifically excluded from the HOA when Sunset Ridge was developed. The HOA's own founding documents acknowledge this exclusion. Steinberg jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, our covenants specifically include provisions for structures that impact the visual character of the community, regardless of property boundaries." Judge Williams looked at him over her reading glasses. "Counselor, are you telling me your clients believe they can enforce architectural standards on property they don't own, that's outside their legal jurisdiction, and that can only be seen by trespassing on private land? Your Honor, the impact on property values is not the court's concern when no law has been broken and no legitimate authority has been violated." She turned to Mike. "Counsel, do you have documentation that Mr. Morrison's construction complies with all applicable codes and regulations?" Mike handed her the county inspection certificate. Judge Williams examined it carefully, then looked back at Steinberg. "Mr. Steinberg, your clients appear to be harassing a property owner who has every right to restore a historic structure on his own land. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Morrison has violated any law, code, or regulation that your clients have standing to enforce?" The silence stretched on for nearly a minute. Steinberg shuffled through his papers, his confident demeanor cracking. "Your Honor, the community covenants do not apply to property outside your jurisdiction. Case dismissed." Judge Williams brought down her gavel with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. "Mr. Steinberg, I suggest you advise your clients to focus their energy on matters within their actual authority." The courtroom erupted. Meredith was on her feet, her face red with rage, shouting something about appeals and property rights. Steinberg was trying to calm her down while gathering his papers. Her supporters looked stunned, like someone had just told them Christmas was canceled. I sat there in shock, hardly believing it was over. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As we filed out of the courtroom, Meredith pushed through the crowd until she was standing right in front of me. Her eyes were wild, her carefully styled hair disheveled from running her hands through it. "This isn't finished," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will make your life hell until you tear down that shack." Mike stepped between us. "Ma'am, that sounds like harassment. I'd be careful about making threats in a courthouse." She glared at him, then back at me. "Watch your back, Morrison. Accidents happen out there in the woods." That afternoon, I drove back to the cabin, feeling like I'd won the lottery. The legal victory was sweet, but even sweeter was the knowledge that I could continue working on Grandpa Joe's place without looking over my shoulder for process servers and building inspectors. I should have known Meredith meant every word of her threat. The first accident happened 2 days later. Someone had dug a hole in my gravel road and covered it with branches and leaves. My truck's front axle snapped when I hit it going 20 miles per hour. Cost me $1,800 and 3 days without transportation. The second accident was more serious. I was working on the cabin roof when my ladder suddenly gave way beneath me. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of the problem someone had sawed halfway through 2 of the legs. I hit the ground hard, broke my left wrist, and spent 6 hours in the emergency room. The third accident nearly killed me. I was using my chainsaw to clear some fallen trees when the chain snapped and whipped back toward my face. I jerked backward instinctively, which saved my life, but the broken chain caught me across the shoulder and chest. 37 stitches and a tetanus shot later, the emergency room doctor told me I was lucky to be alive. When I got home from the hospital, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. Accidents happen, especially to people who don't listen to good advice. That's when I knew I was dealing with something more dangerous than HOA harassment. Someone was actively trying to hurt me, maybe kill me, and I was pretty sure I knew who was behind it. But knowing and proving are 2 different things. And Meredith Blackwell struck me as the type of person who was very careful about keeping her hands clean. I spent that night sitting on my porch with a .45 in my lap and a growing sense that I was fighting a war I couldn't win. Meredith had money, lawyers, and apparently no moral boundaries. I had a broken wrist, a pile of medical bills, and a cabin that was starting to feel more like a target than a refuge. That's when I remembered something Grandpa Joe used to say: sometimes the best way to catch a rat is to make it think the cheese is unguarded. I called Danny the next morning. "They're trying to kill me," I told him without preamble. "What the hell are you talking about?" I explained the accidents, the escalating harassment, the threatening note. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Jake, you need to file a police report." "With what evidence?" "A sawed ladder and a note that anyone could have written?" "Then what do you want to do?" "I want to catch them in the act. But I'm going to need help." Another pause. "What kind of help?" "The kind that requires a judge's signature on a warrant." "Jake, Danny, they tried to kill me." "With a chainsaw." "If I hadn't jerked backward at exactly the right moment, you'd be planning my funeral right now instead of having this conversation." I could hear him thinking. "Finally, what do you need?" "I need surveillance equipment. Cameras, recording devices, the kind of stuff that would be admissible in court. And I need someone who can install it legally. That's going to require probable cause for a wiretap warrant. I've got 3 assault attempts and documented harassment. How much probable cause do you need?" "Let me make some calls." 2 days later, a county sheriff's detective named Maria Santos came to visit my cabin. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of dealing with the worst humanity has to offer. "Mr. Morrison, Judge Morrison asked me to look into your situation," she said, as we walked around the property. "He's concerned about the escalation pattern here." I showed her the sawed ladder, the repaired chainsaw, the hole in my driveway. She took pictures of everything and filled out a thick incident report. "Here's what I can do," she said when we finished. "I can't get you a wiretap warrant based on what we have so far, but I can authorize a surveillance operation on your property. Hidden cameras, audio recording devices, the works. If someone's trying to hurt you, we'll catch them in the act. How long will that take to set up?" "I can have a tech team out here tomorrow night. But Mr. Morrison, I need you to understand something. If we catch these people, and if they're connected to this HOA situation, This is going to become a very big deal very quickly. Conspiracy, assault, attempted murder, we're talking serious felony charges. Good. It's about time someone held these people accountable. She smiled grimly. Be careful what you wish for. People with money and lawyers don't go down easy. They'll try to destroy your reputation, your livelihood, everything. Are you prepared for that fight? I thought about Grandpa Joe, about the summers we'd spent at this cabin, about the 3 years I'd put into bringing it back to life. Detective Santos, they've already tried to kill me. I'm prepared for whatever comes next. The tech team installed the surveillance equipment on a moonless Thursday night. Tiny cameras hidden in trees, motion sensors along all the access routes, audio pickups that could record a whispered conversation from 50 yards away. The main recording hub was hidden in my tool shed, hardwired to a cellular uplink that would stream everything to the sheriff's department in real time. If a squirrel farts within 100 yards of your cabin, we'll know about it, the lead tech told me as he finished the installation. Just go about your normal routine. If someone comes onto your property with malicious intent, we'll have them on video from multiple angles. I spent the next 3 days working on the cabin as if nothing had changed. Replaced the gutters, restained the front porch, installed the last of the interior light fixtures. All the while, I felt like I was being watched, which I was, but by my own surveillance system rather than Meredith's people. On Sunday evening, as I was cleaning up my tools, I heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, just like before. My heart started racing, but I forced myself to continue working. Whatever happened next, the cameras would capture every second of it. The same convoy of SUVs and pickup trucks emerged from the tree line, but this time, they weren't alone. A large box truck followed behind them, along with a trailer carrying what looked like construction equipment. Meredith climbed out of her Escalade wearing work clothes for the first time since I'd met her. Behind her came a dozen men I didn't recognize, not HOA members, but rough-looking guys in work boots and hard hats. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying across the clearing. "I hope you've had time to reconsider our previous discussions." I walked to the edge of my porch, tools still in my hands. "Meredith, you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you and your friends leave before I call the sheriff." She laughed. "The sheriff? That's funny. You see, Jake, I've done my research. Your cousin the judge, your lawyer friend, even that detective who's been sniffing around, they can't help you now." One of the construction workers started unloading a bulldozer from the trailer. Another opened the back of the box truck, revealing sledgehammers, crowbars, and what looked like industrial demolition equipment. "You've got one last chance," Meredith continued. "Sign this deed transfer, sell me your property for fair market value, and walk away. Or we'll tear down your little shack ourselves and let the lawyers sort it out later." She held up a document. Even from 20 feet away, I could see it was a property deed. "And if I refuse? Then you'll discover just how many accidents can happen to one person in a very short period of time." Her smile was cold and predatory. "Construction sites are dangerous places, Jake. Heavy machinery, sharp tools, unstable structures. So many ways for someone to get hurt." The bulldozer rumbled to life. 2 men with sledgehammers approached my cabin from opposite sides. "You have 30 seconds to decide," Meredith announced. I looked around at the dozen armed men surrounding my property, at the heavy equipment, at the woman who had just threatened to murder me on camera. Then I smiled. "Meredith, there's something I should probably mention." "What?" "For the past week, this entire property has been under surveillance by the county sheriff's department. Every word you just said, every threat you just made, has been recorded by multiple cameras and transmitted directly to the sheriff's office." Her face went white. Around the clearing, her hired thugs looked at each other nervously. "You're lying." "Am I?" I pointed to the tree line. Camera in the big oak, 30 yards behind you. Another one in the pine to your left. Audio pickup in that maple tree recording every word. Motion sensors on all the access roads. Detective Santos has been watching this whole thing from the sheriff's office. As if on cue, my phone rang. I answered it on speaker. Jake, this is Detective Santos. We've got enough to arrest everyone on your property for conspiracy, criminal trespass, and attempted extortion. Tell Mrs. Blackwell she has 2 minutes to get her people off your land before we send in the tactical team. The silence that followed was beautiful. Meredith stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her hired construction crew was already backing toward their vehicles. This isn't over, she finally managed. Actually, it is, Detective Santos said through my phone. Mrs. Blackwell, you're under arrest. We'll be there in 3 minutes. What happened next was like something out of a movie. Sirens filled the air as half the county sheriff's department converged on my property. Meredith and 4 of her board members were arrested on the spot. The construction crew scattered like leaves in the wind, abandoning their equipment in their haste to escape. But the real fireworks started the next day. It turned out that Detective Santos and her team had been building a case against Meredith for months. The surveillance operation at property was just the final piece of evidence they needed. Meredith Blackwell wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a sophisticated extortion racket that targeted property owners throughout the county. Her method was always the same: identify properties she wanted to acquire, use HOA authority or fabricated legal claims to harass the owners, then escalate to physical intimidation when legal pressure failed. Over the past 3 years, she had forced 7 families to sell their properties at below-market prices. 2 more had been driven into bankruptcy by legal fees and property damage. And in at least 3 cases, property owners had suffered mysterious accidents after refusing to cooperate with her demands. The investigation that followed was a prosecutor's dream. Meredith's own records, seized during a search warrant of her home office, contained detailed plans for acquiring dozens of properties throughout the county. She had target lists, financial projections, even contractor estimates for accident scenarios. But here's the beautiful part: she had kept records of everything. Every bribe paid to code enforcement officers, every contractor hired to vandalize property, every payoff to create false inspection reports. She documented her crimes like a serial killer keeping trophies. The conspiracy trial became the biggest news story in county history. Meredith and 12 co-conspirators were charged with everything from extortion to conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming: surveillance footage, financial records, recorded phone calls, and the testimony of victims who had been too scared to come forward before. I testified for 3 days. Mike Chen walked me through every detail of my interactions with Meredith, from that first confrontation on my porch to the final surveillance footage of her threatening to bulldoze my cabin. The defense tried to portray her as an overzealous community leader who got carried away with her duties. But the prosecution had too much evidence. The jury convicted her on all counts after deliberating for less than 4 hours. Judge Patricia Williams sentenced Meredith Blackwell to 15 years in federal prison. Her co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. The HOA was dissolved, and all the properties she had illegally acquired were returned to their original owners or their estates. But the sweetest revenge came 6 months later. The county decided to turn my grandfather's cabin into a historical landmark. It turns out that Grandpa Joe's place was one of the oldest continuously inhabited structures in the county, and my restoration work had preserved architectural details that dated back to the 1800s. They installed a bronze plaque on my front porch, Morrison Heritage Cabin, restored 2023, a testament to family history and traditional craftsmanship. The plaque ceremony was attended by half the county, including Judge Patricia Williams, Detective Santos, and my cousin Danny. Even some of Meredith's former neighbors showed up to apologize for not speaking out sooner. As I stood on my porch that day, looking out over 40 acres of forest and the creek where I'd learned to fish as a kid, I thought about Grandpa Joe. He would have gotten a kick out of this whole situation. A lifelong troublemaker himself, he would have loved the idea of his cabin becoming a symbol of resistance against bullying and corruption. The restoration project that started as a labor of love had become something bigger. It was proof that sometimes, when you stand up to bullies and refuse to back down, justice actually wins. Meredith Blackwell thought she could intimidate me into giving up my family's land. She thought her money and lawyers and hired thugs made her untouchable. She thought, wrong. The irony wasn't lost on me that her obsession with property values and community standards had ultimately destroyed her own life. While I was sitting on my restored porch, watching deer graze in the meadow and listening to Mill Creek babble in the distance, she was spending her days in a federal prison cell, staring at concrete walls. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after Meredith's sentencing, I got a visitor I wasn't expecting. A black sedan pulled up my gravel road on a Tuesday morning, and out stepped a woman in an expensive business suit. For a moment, my heart raced had one of Meredith's associates come for revenge. But this woman was different. Professional, polite, carrying a briefcase instead of threats. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Sarah Chen, attorney with the State Attorney General's office. I wonder if we could talk." She explained that Meredith's case had opened up a much larger investigation into HOA corruption throughout the state. Apparently, Meredith hadn't been working alone. She was part of a network of HOA presidents and board members who shared tactics, resources, and even contractors for their extortion schemes. "We've identified at least 47 similar cases across 12 counties," Sarah told me as we sat on my porch. Meredith kept detailed records of her contacts and methods. "Your case has become the template for prosecuting this entire network." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Morrison, we'd like you to consider serving as a witness in a federal racketeering case. This network has stolen millions of dollars in property and destroyed dozens of families. Your testimony could help us shut them down permanently." I thought about all the families who had suffered the same harassment I'd endured, the people who hadn't been lucky enough to have a judge for a cousin or the resources to fight back. How many had lost their homes? How many had been driven into bankruptcy or depression? What do you need from me? The federal trial took 2 years to work its way through the system. During that time, I became something of an accidental celebrity in the property rights community. News outlets from across the country came to interview me at the cabin. My story was featured in documentaries about HOA abuse, legal journals about property law, and even a true crime podcast that reached #1 on the charts. But through it all, I kept working on the cabin. What started as a 3-month restoration project had become a decade-long labor of love. I added a workshop, expanded the porch, built a dock on Mill Creek, and created hiking trails throughout the 40 acres. The property became a gathering place for family and friends. My cousin Danny brought his kids out for weekend camping trips. Detective Santos and her family became regular visitors. Even Judge Patricia Williams stopped by occasionally to check on my progress and share a beer on the porch. The federal trial resulted in 37 convictions and prison sentences, totaling over 400 years. The racketeering network was completely dismantled, and new legislation was passed to prevent HOA abuse in the future. As for Meredith herself, she tried to appeal her conviction 3 times. Each appeal was denied. She tried to get early release for good behavior. Denied. She even tried to claim that her prosecution was politically motivated because of my connection to Judge Danny Morrison. That appeal was not only denied, But the appellate court added an additional year to her sentence for filing frivolous motions. She's scheduled for release in 2038. She'll be 73 years old. Meanwhile, the Sunset Ridge development never recovered from the scandal. Property values plummeted when the story broke. Half the houses went into foreclosure when their owners couldn't afford the legal fees and fines associated with the HOA's illegal activities. The development was eventually sold to a company that tore down most of the houses and turned the land back into forest. Today, you'd never know there was once a subdivision there. Nature has a way of reclaiming what was always hers to begin with. I still live in the cabin full-time now. What started as a weekend restoration project became my permanent home when I realized I'd never been happier anywhere else. I started a small business doing historical restoration work, specializing in log cabins and traditional construction techniques. The bronze plaque on my porch has been joined by others over the years. The National Registry of Historic Places, the State Historical Society, the Traditional Building Arts Foundation. Each recognition means something, but they all pale in comparison to the simple satisfaction of sitting on this porch on a summer evening, listening to the same creak that my grandfather listened to 60 years ago. Last month, I got a letter forwarded through my lawyer's office. No return address, but the postmark was from the Federal Correctional Institution where Meredith is serving her time. The letter was short. Mr. Morrison, I want you to know that I think about your cabin every day. I think about what I could have accomplished if I had focused my energy on building something instead of tearing things down. I was wrong about everything. I hope someday I can make amends for the harm I caused. M. Blackwell. I read the letter twice, then folded it up and put it in my desk drawer. I haven't decided whether to respond. Part of me wants to believe that people can change, that even someone as destructive as Meredith can learn from their mistakes. But part of me remembers the look in her eyes when she threatened to bulldoze my cabin, the cold calculation in her voice when she talked about accidents happening to people who didn't cooperate. Some people deserve forgiveness. Others just deserve to face the consequences of their choices. Either way, she'll have plenty of time to think about it. As for me, I'm planning my next project. There's an old stone foundation about a mile upstream where another cabin once stood. According to county records, it was built by my great-great-grandfather in 1887. The structure itself is long gone, but the foundation is solid. I think Grandpa Joe would approve of me expanding the family compound. After all, you never know when you might need somewhere safe to retreat when the HOA Karens of the world come calling. But if they do come, they'll find me ready. I've got surveillance cameras, a direct line to the sheriff's department, and a cousin who's now the senior judge in the county. Most importantly, I've got something worth defending and the knowledge that sometimes, when you refuse to back down from bullies, justice really does win in the end. The cabin sits exactly as it did 60 years ago, nestled in the woods beside Mill Creek, surrounded by 40 acres of peace and quiet. The only difference is that now it's protected by law, watched over by cameras, and defended by someone who learned that the best way to honor your family's legacy is to fight for it with everything you've got. Meredith Blackwell wanted to erase my history to protect her property values. Instead, she ended up making that history more permanent than she ever could have imagined. And somewhere in a federal prison cell, she has 14 more years to think about the irony of that particular outcome.